Good evening, and welcome to this second in a series of Speaker's Corner that is focusing on trends in education, vital trends, even amid the still unrelenting pandemic. Tonight, we focus on outdoor school, the need and current drive to get much more out of schooling, much more of our schooling out of classrooms and into the outdoors and reconnected to nature. Sounds like a major redesign of education going forward. But some trends to move beyond indoor classes and have started before COVID, but the pandemic certainly gave it new emphasis. There are signs of a major movement is underway. Today, in fact, is the 11th annual Take Your Students Outdoors Day that encouraged teachers to take classes outside for at least an hour today. Before our discussion, it'll be useful, however, to remind ourselves that the push for more outdoors has surfaced before. This is the Hyde Park Forest School in Toronto, operating among trees just before World War I. It was started as a health measure to protect students from tuberculosis and cholera threats in overcrowded city areas. It did fascinating work. Some saw inspiration in these experiments when COVID struck here, but the core question remains how to permanently introduce a more natural education balance. And today that means not only getting students back to nature, but also creating less sterile playgrounds and more creative opportunities for play and exploration. Fortunately, we have three guests tonight who are very much innovators and designers of a new potential in outdoor school. David Hawker-Budlovsky is a major driver of outdoor education of the Toronto District School Board. The centrally assigned principal responsible for outdoor education schools. Collier heads Toronto's nonprofit Evergreen program to connect children and nature and is a leading voice in Canada's outdoor education and school ground design. And John El-Raheb, a VP of marketing for Bienenstock, natural playgrounds, that designs new forms of more challenging play areas in Canada and the United States. Before we start, to get a better idea of what they do, I'll ask each of them to give a brief description of their struggles today, their activities today, and how they see a need for a better way forward. First, David, could you start?
Thank you, Brian. Really excited to be here and the conversation that we're going to have among our panelists. I've been an educator with the Toronto District School Board for the last 23 years. Started my teaching in the elementary grades in inner city Scarborough, moved into as an outdoor education teacher at the Island Natural Science School, and have been an administrator in 3 other schools across the district. Taking kids outside has always been a passion of mine, no matter what role I've been in and where I've gone. I was that person taking students outside regularly on cold days, misty days, in gym class, in science class, in grade 2 and grade 4, all those different places on how we could just expand the learning and build new relationships and a sense of wonder in the world around us. My current role in the TDSB, as Brian said, is overseeing our outdoor education centers. And we have 9 outdoor education centers, 4 day centers where students get to visit them for 1 day and engage in outdoor learning and programming, and 5 overnight centers where students in the middle years come and join us for 3 to 5 days at a time, often their first experience away from home, and can really be life-changing for many of them. But as COVID hit, and prior to that, labor situations, we had to reimagine what outdoor education looked like in Canada's largest school board. And we started to support schools in new and interesting ways, going into school grounds to do programming right in local communities and the spaces that children and teachers are used to, moving experiences online where we could be the eyes and hands and touch and smell for those students on the other side of a screen. as we continue to respond to the pandemic and things emerge, we continue to do things in new and different ways and are excited to the possibilities as how we reimagine schooling and support teachers to make outdoor learning part of their everyday activity so that outdoor education isn't something that happens once a year or once in a experience in a term, but rather something that happens all the time.
Cam, could you come in?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Let me introduce myself. My name's Cam Collier, and I'm here in my role with Evergreen, where I'm a senior advisor there. And I've been with the Canadian charitable organization Evergreen since 1997. And a big focus of Evergreen has been connecting Canadians to nature locally. And a big part of a subset of that work has been focused on schools. And so trying to green the schools, thinking about that marriage between reimagining the design of the school ground, while at the same time reimagining outdoor learning, whether or not the school ground is designed. So getting the program and the design of the landscape together and elevate them both. So I've been interested in that topic for a long time, been working on it. We've supported grassroots efforts at schools, but we've also been interested in how the institutions can shift to support this kind of work. And, one of our first partnerships started 20 years ago with the Toronto District School Board, building, a design guidelines and having designers in-house and routine series of professional development for teachers and a whole series of things that have since become embedded in the Toronto District School Board. And we've worked with 18 different school boards across the country. So we're interested in the movement Canadian-wide, and we've also been helped establish we're one of the co-founders of the International School Ground Alliance, which was an organization that has international connections from Asia to Europe to Africa to the Americas. And the focus there is a lot on sharing innovation, ideas, supporting each other, so that there's a more vibrant international conversation and a voice on issues like risk and outdoor learning and the value of play and all the connected issues that are related here. So that's me, and I'll leave it there.
John, welcome. Come in.
Thanks, Brian. Yes, I'm John El-Raheb, and I'm one of the vice presidents at Bienenstock Natural Playgrounds. Been with the company for close to 15 years, just over 15 years now. And our focus has really been creating sensory-rich outdoor learning environments, so the built environment. And so from there, we do a lot of natural playground and outdoor classroom work across North America. And part of our work is also trying to help teachers with the curriculum that they're trying to deliver as part of their requirements for the province that they're in, for example, and using these spaces to help them do that and make it easier to do that. I got to say that my dirty secret has been the pandemic has really helped those advocates that really want to be doing this and have been doing this to maybe get some more traction and get out there. And some of the work that we do is to hopefully make it easier for those teachers that maybe might be a little bit nervous or not sure where to start, so they can get out there and start to see and realize the benefits that that we've all been seeing and realizing before the pandemic hit. So I'm happy that we're starting to see this gain more traction and more people talking about it and trying to do the work.
Okay, now for a discussion. Before we proceed, notice that you can ask questions in that little red box down near the bottom of the screen. So do send your questions in, please, as we proceed. I'll be getting to them later. First, I'd like to open with this general feeling one gets that the pandemic has really, really damaged us, damaged the school system terribly. And we may not even know the full extent of the damage, but in this crisis, as often happens in a crisis, there may be really, I hate to say golden opportunities, but real natural opportunities to push ahead. Do you see it that way? Anyone jump in on this? Am I being too optimistic here, or in fact, has the damage been such that it's going to put us right off reform for some considerable time when we come back? Anyone can answer that.
I'll jump in. I think Brian, there's been a couple of things that have happened. I mean, for many people, one is how valuable that time when we've been in the cave and COVID. Our one outlet has been to go for walks, and often then we seek out the local park or natural area, whatever it is, and that has been a lifeline for so many people, adults and kids alike. And at the same time, I think as parents, we've seen our kids turn into zombies indoors, and with that incredible attractive seduction of the screens, but also really the large failure of online learning. I've witnessed it. It's a cocktail conversation, and I'm sure for most of us how difficult that has been on our kids. So that has created an opening for the conversation. It has forced outdoor learning in many cases. And so teachers have been pushed into it, and that's afforded new opportunities for the kids, for the teacher. And I think many of us are interested in expanding on that. Professional development has grown for one, in a hurry. What do we have here? How can we support our teachers? Props and things that they can take out to the school ground, that kind of thing has happened. So those kind of the student experience and the adult experience of natural areas has really come together to bring it into the forefront. I think you said yourself, it's in the news. It's a hot conversation right now, not just in the news, but around the dinner table.
Another thing that strikes me is that when you talk to people in their, say, 30s or 40s, they say they're reading a lot about this with concern, because they think that even before COVID, there was a real problem of growing isolation among the young, growing cut off with the rise of the internet, different communications. More and more students, more and more kids go home after school, stay in front of a screen. In the old days, they may have played outside together. So a lot of the playing that can be done at school is play they don't have naturally as much now as they would have had 20 or 30 years ago. So really the schools have to reintroduce maybe more getting of groups together, forming play groups. Anyone open to that? David?
I saw John come off mute as well. Are we gonna rock, paper, scissors?
You go ahead, David. You start.
I'll get started. Yeah. It's so true. Cam really got us started in such a good way, talking about rethinking and coming out of the cave. I really like that analogy that he used. But the one thing that I would like to say is that there have always been champions of taking learning outside, and for them, it's really just given the blossom of opportunity for them to be leaders in the system, and hopefully has got some of those that were on the fence about how I can really do this moving forward. Part of the TDSB's response to the pandemic has really been the importance of play. And play not just in kindergarten in the early years, but play from kindergarten right through grade 12 and beyond into our adult learners. And maybe not the definition of play that we all kind of imagine, building out the blocks or some loose parts, but the idea of student voice and choice, the idea of collaborating together, the idea of following those sense of inquiry and curiosity and understanding and taking the learning opportunities out of that, and not doing that in isolation. And how can we do that together? Over to you, John.
I was just thinking about, well said, David. And I think that before the pandemic, we were seeing issues with screen time. Kids were already spending way too much time in front of a screen, more than a full-time job's worth in some of the stats that we were seeing. So that the pandemic didn't really help with that, because we were isolated, and the only way to be connected people were seeing was through the screen, was through social media. And so we were now joining these communities through the screen instead of the people that we are actually living with and interacting with when we had those opportunities to be able to go to school and be at school. I think that one of the other things that we're missing when we're learning through a screen is the full sensory engagement, which is why these natural spaces and having opportunity just to be outside is so important, because it does provide us to be able to engage those multiple senses. And I've seen how important that is in our learning, and I want to see more. And how do we help kids and teachers access that, especially in urban centers where maybe they don't have green space or a lot of green space that they can go to. So their only experience is going to be at school or at that local park. So seeing more of those is going to be really important.
What about that? I'm dealing with several skeptics' points now, perhaps, that those who say, okay, it's all very well, that more field trips, more time in parks nearby for the well-off schools. But what about the schools that aren't well-off, that are in inner cities? I mean, what real chance do they have, given a bleak playground and a pretty contained, built-up area around them, to get the kind of outdoor creativity that you three are all trying to push?
Well, I think the one thing that I'm going to speak to is in the TDSB, we have such a vast array of neighborhoods, communities that with schools in them. And what I continue to tell people is that to go outside and to take learning outside, what you need is a door. And to use that door to step through, and whatever is on the other side of that door becomes what is your classroom. And whether that is an incredible ravine that you back onto and rich natural land, naturalized spaces, or a tarmac and a meadow to explore, or even the middle of the built-up urban environment, there are so many opportunities to learn once you step outside that door. Whether that's a primary student at this time of year looking at the leaves changing colors and what's happening in your neighborhood, whether it's going on a math walk and seeing the patterns and shapes that you see around you, whether it's music and creating soundscapes with the natural sounds that you hear where you are. But taking that first step through the threshold is what allows that opportunity to happen. So really, sky's the limit once you get through that.
Cam, you and John have been very involved in redesigning new forms of play, what would you call it, structures perhaps, or things that kids can now play with, that gives their imagination, their sense of balance and natural place in the universe a bigger play. I mean, can we even use smaller areas to bring in new designs to schools and make even smaller areas quite challenging and creative in the exploratory sense?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I think that what's important here, I'm not a fan of the idea that this work is about structures. I think historically our school grounds have been about a flat, barren expanse, and let's plunk in a play structure. And that's what the kids play on. And that's fundamentally, that doesn't make any sense, for one, if you watch a school ground, like how kids play and what they're drawn to. So we think of the whole landscape. It has to do with, this is about topography, this is about vegetation and tree canopy, as well as challenge elements. But it's also about seating and shelter and things that just meet our normal sense of well-being and support the kids. Now, the other part to this is that we can design wonderful school grounds, nature-rich, diverse, and that kind of thing. But the other aspect of this that's really important is the loose parts. It's kind of an education term of loose parts in play. And these are the things that we can manipulate, the things that we can bring out. It's the bucket and shovel to the beach, right? It's not complicated. But when you go to the beach without a bucket and a shovel, you're a little envious of those that have them. So you can add those elements in, and they make for a whole thing. And these can become logs and sticks. They can become a variety of elements. That's when the leaves fall. Well, and
milk crates.
All of it. And what's the biggest loose parts play day of the year? It's first snowfall, right? So these things are. It's important that you think about these as a designer. That you're supporting these things. You're not fighting against them. You're working with all these natural opportunities and the things that you bring to it. So lots can be done in a small amount of space. And I'll say one more thing, Brian, which is that when you come into contact with great design for children's spaces in schools or in public parks, you start to see that it's a series of small rooms, and it's like moving from one room to another. And that's the feeling when you're in these great spaces. So there's different feelings, different things going on, different level of activity, level of social activity. So that those things can be done whatever space you have.
John, you're working this, and you've looked at work in the United States as well. That's all very, very fascinating to watch when you look at schools, how they're experimenting with new instruments. I couldn't agree more, Cam, that you really could use almost anything that's safe, for play. But you're also looking at new shapes to design, sort of to bring nature in different ways into schools.
Yeah, I think I loved what Cam said about the rooms, and you can have a small space and have those different activities in different rooms along the way. And I think that's so critical, that when we look at the design of a space, we're not just looking at putting a structure in the middle of a field and then having all of your sensory input on the periphery. Even those things, that really is something that drives me nuts. I believe that everybody should have access to all of that sensory engagement, and we need to bring that plant material in. That could be used as your buffer. Somebody made a comment about the trees and plant material in the school ground. I think it's so critical that we are using plant material to provide windbreak, shade. They also provide loose parts. And so when we start to talk about how can we bring these things in, we don't have to spend a lot of money to be able to do that, and give those experiences if we do have access to these little pieces of nature. What we're seeing across North America really is more schools are starting to see that it's important that we can have these different rooms. I like that terminology, Cam. I want everybody to be a master of something, because we're not all the same. We all learn differently. So it's not fair to just put in an upper body gross motor piece and think that we're going to now hit the whole population of that school, and that they're going to actually get, every child is going to get the same out of it. So if we can provide different types of play, different opportunities, creative, dramatic, a quiet contemplative space, then we're going to start to do is see these kids cycle through the rooms. And some kids that maybe never would have gone to that upper body gross motor piece, because the A-type child is using it, they're going to cycle out and give that other child a chance in. So I think there's a lot of dynamics that can happen if when we're looking at the design of a space and putting these different rooms together. I'm going to steal that, Cam. Thank you.
To pin down more what we're talking about here, the big issue, time. I mean, what are we really discussing? David, you've done a lot of speaking on this, about we have to look beyond just the recess period, the few times a week getting outside. You're talking fairly bold of going outside every single day, even in winter, a winter country like this. I mean, you really want to rethink as to what percentage of the year or the day is actually spent outside by Canadian kids.
I think if you would do a survey of 50 teachers, you'd get 50 different answers to that question. And I think the one thing that I'm going to start by saying is that we need to normalize teaching and learning outdoors, and that going outside isn't just for free time or today for a mask break, but actually for learning. And so the examples I gave earlier are all curriculum connected, intentional reasons to go outside. And if you aren't going outside on a regular basis, in the middle of February, you're going to say, hey, we're going to go spend all of today outside, you're going to get pushback. The teachers aren't going to like it. The students aren't going to like it. The parents aren't going to understand. But as we start school in this country and in this part of the country in September, where it's still quite mild and quite pleasant to be outside, and that becomes your norm. And as the seasons change and you feel the change, and being outside is part of the expectation and the experience, then all of a sudden December will hit you and it's a gray, damp day. And first of all, more students come to school ready to be outside and spend more time. And it normalizes the time, and you can start to increase that time. On those really frigid days where it'll be an indoor recess or lunch because we can't take kids outside, a truly Southern Ontario thing. You know, kids in the north don't stay inside when it's -20 because they wouldn't get outside for 6 months of the year. But in Toronto, it's -15 and we start talking about wind chill and we can't go outside. We can't go outside because we're not prepared for it. And so how do we get used to being outside in these types of, and I don't want to say inclement weather because it's totally clement weather. It's our climate changes. And we do understand that not all families have the same access to resources. So as we start to do it and normalize it, we start to work with our families and communities to support them to be ready to be outside. And those are ways that we can do it.
As somebody said on this very subject, that there are no bad weather days, only bad clothing. That is, as we learn more about, as children learn more about what's expected on a given day, that's a very important part of any Canadian's learning experience. But learning runs right through this, does it not? Learning how to face risk. Cam, we've sort of taken so much risk away from our schoolyards and play that students don't naturally learn the way maybe they did 30 or 40 years ago, how to deal with risk or how to learn from it, what to take away from it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Cam.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, John, I'll be quick and then you can jump on. I think that the key here is that we built an industry around risk assessment, and the goal of that industry largely became eliminating risk. And it's led us to the place that we largely are now. But there are some signs of hope. You know, one, I mean, we've been writing articles for the last 20 years. I mean, from the cover of Maclean's to, you know, the Globe about, you know, at what cost, basically. You know, the bubble wrap child, the cotton wool child, you know, they have names for it. The strawberry kids, they call them in Korea, you know, so, you know, pretty on the outside, but very fragile if you take them, you know, like this kind of thing. So the good news is that the pendulum's starting to swing back. And the difference now in the simplest term is that we look at the benefit side too. So now we don't just do risk assessment, we do risk benefit assessment. And we say, okay, well, this kind of activity, yeah, it has risks, but it has but let's unpack the benefits here. You know, whether it's social cohesion or whether it's balance and, you know, development of the inner ear, or, you know, judgment, and all these important aspects of development that we pushed aside in the name of sort of making it more safe. But it's a short-term thinking and it's not long-term, so that the kids develop the acuity, their bodies, their minds, their judgment, so that they can go forward in the world with skills, with confidence. And we need risk takers. I mean, this is where innovation comes from. There's ties to our economy. I mean, there's, you know, you can go on on this topic, but the hopeful part here is that we're starting to account for the benefits as well as sort of the costs of any certain activity or element, that kind of thing. John, why don't I pass it to you there?
Thanks, Kim. I totally agree with you. And I think that when you look at the risk, there's a difference between a catastrophic injury and a learning injury. And I think we can mitigate the catastrophic injuries, concussions, broken limbs, hospital visits. But I think that part of growing up is experiencing those learning injuries, because that's the only way that we're going to learn how to assess risk and make better decisions as we get older, when we become less resilient. So taking away all risk is really going to hurt, but I think we can be smart on giving those opportunities still in a way that we're not dealing with those catastrophic sides as well. That was really all I wanted to add.
How great, though, is the skepticism and hurdles you have to face? I'm thinking of the principal of a school who says, nothing more, I don't want any scraped knees on my playground. I don't want any angry parents coming to my door on that. Or the parents who say, we've raised our kid not to be on a teeter-totter. We don't want any kind of risk. Is there a kind of blowback out there that you're always going to run into, trying to push back the kind of reform we're talking about, that really requires parents and school principals to take a deep breath and let a well-designed nature take its course? David, you're dealing with these issues, I'm sure, a lot.
It is a reality. And I really appreciate the conversation that both John and Cam spoke to. There is real risk and there is perceived risk. Running our outdoor education centers, there's such panic of the challenge courses that we run, students getting up on the high ropes and low ropes. But I go back to, really, if we want to talk about risk, the riskiest part of an outdoor education trip is driving on the 401 on the school bus to get to your destination. If you've made it there, the chance of something catastrophic, like John said, happening is actually extremely low, because the mitigation happens. By bubble wrapping the students and not having those opportunities to learn and assess their environment, we're actually creating more opportunities for long-term hurt and endangerment in the future. John, you had your mic muted, came off for a second.
No, I was just thinking about when it's compared to what conversation too in those situations. You oftentimes have a lot of parents or principals that are like totally comfortable with a metal play structure and those metal posts, but maybe not a boulder. And it's like, oh, what is that? Why do you see that this is more dangerous? Oh, well, if somebody hits their head on that boulder, and then I think, well, is it going to be worse or better if they hit their head on a metal post of a play structure in that same situation? So I think looking at it compared to what, and then also, if you look at OSB, which is one of the insurers, one of the bigger insurers for school boards, when you look at their stats on injury rates, playgrounds are actually lower than gymnasiums, cafeterias, and even your asphalt areas that don't have any play features. Their stats show more injuries are happening there. So I also think that that's interesting that that we worry about certain things and not others. And I always come back, so compared to what and why is this okay and that not okay?
Well, as we look at these images in our minds of playgrounds with many more things that students can experiment with and be creative about and argue over or come together on, how does a really creative outdoor experience, say an hour every day a week, how does it start to change a student's personality or a group personality? Does bullyism become affected at all? Can different grades play better with each other if they're using the same material? If you look at it as a personality altering experience, what are you seeing among students that change how they're changed with the outdoor experience that you've been talking about? Field trips, playgrounds, new equipment, old equipment, anything they can get their hands on. What are you seeing?
I see that if you diversify that landscape, and John spoke to this, and David knows all about this. He's done it at his own schools. You give this opportunity for kids to find their space. So one, you're sending not an explicit and implicit message that you're meeting their needs, and the kids respond to that, right? They say, "Oh, this is for me right now." And I think John made this point too. It's a really important one. There aren't, certain type kids. You're this type, and then there's this type, and there's this type, and those kids play on the play structure, and those kids always sit down and chat. Kids may have tendencies, but in the right environment, you'll move through those things. You seek out the variety if it's offered to you. So the kids respond that their needs are being met, and that's a good feeling. That's a feeling of feeling cared for. We all respond to that. And that gives us confidence to do new things, to explore whatever that new thing is, that whatever our edge might be, risk-wise, whether it's a physical thing or whether it's having a chat with someone because I'm, incredibly introverted and I have trouble making friends. If I create a seating under a tree, I say, hey, this is a place you can bump into a friend where you feel comfortable. I think, and there's a lot here, and I'm sure David could talk to this on learning and all the different learning styles. But when you get hands-on and multisensory, you open up new pathways. You're also taking away the hierarchy of the classroom. When you're in and I know we're not all in rows in desks anymore. There's tables and stations, and depends on the classroom. But there's a really strong hierarchy in the classroom that's kind of explicit and implicit. And when you go outside, not only does your relationship change with your fellow students, because people can be a little bit more themselves, find their own way, your relationship with your teacher changes too. Because it's not quite as the teacher on the throne and the child as subject listening. It's a little more. There's a different opportunity socially for teachers that we've seen that it can be very powerful for a child to get excited about their learning. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and you've been looking at the actual changes that students go under. In the playgrounds, where they're out there playing, like different groups come together, like age groups. You spend more time together, where before they're more isolated from each other, and whole different structures tend to emerge fairly rapidly. Is that the case?
I think from what we've seen, there's opportunities for graduated challenge. So you can have elements that the different age groups each can use safely, and in their own way, but then you have the younger kids seeing how the older kids use it and have this, they want to aspire to be able to get to that ability. We also see spontaneous social collaboration in these situations. I wanted to pull a photo. There's a big stump and there's a little girl reading a book with an older guy that's jumping off behind her at a school in Dundas outside of Hamilton here, and they were able to do two different activities with this same piece and in harmony. They weren't the person jumping off the stump wasn't interfering with the girl reading her book and vice versa. So I think that's really interesting when you start to see that dynamic, and then being able to spread out the play and the pressure that helps with the reduction in bullyism, because you no longer have one focal point that I want to control. And so I'll leave it at that. I think, David, you probably have something to add.
Oh, I again, it goes off. Cam, you had no idea when you talked about the rooms how much we were going to play with that tonight, and really it goes to that idea of students finding space. And John, that's exactly what I wanted to say. As you spread out the opportunities for students to learn, explore, and discover, the incidence of bullying doesn't happen. At the same time, the camaraderie grows as well, and students from across grade levels and interests come together as well, because they're learning from each other. The older students want to see what the younger students are doing. The younger students want to see what the older students are doing, in a real kind of harmonious kind of way, like that. And again, spreading the students out with lots of rich environments for them to explore way better anytime than one focal point where people are congregating.
Presumably, this would help the biodiversity need we have as well, and the different cultures coming together, playing and experimenting and creating in this form outdoors. You notice that at all, the sort of social effect of mingling the ages, mingling the opportunities? Cam?
Absolutely. I think this is not this shouldn't be just a fringe benefit.
Yeah.
This should be something we focus on. The creating a positive social environment is really important, and our schools are so central in that. It's the place where the vast majority of Canadians go through the public school system, and we need to socialize together, and not just in the formal structure of class, but on the school ground where there's more informal rules. But the combination of the landscape and the setup and the leadership from the principal come together to create this nurturing environment where kids can be themselves and learn from each other and get to know each other. And this is so central to the fabric of our society going forward. And so, I don't want to overstate it, but our school ground is, we spend an inordinate amount of time in elementary and high school, and we have this extraordinary opportunity right outside the school to nurture, a sense of healthy diversity, a sense of, camaraderie, of shared purpose. And we need to send the cultural messages that we care for you and we want to support you in this. I just want, tying back to the, we've had this message about diversifying the school ground, the landscape. The opposite, right, is a lot of where we are now, which is that the school grounds are so boring, a flat, barren expanse, that it's boredom. And this is what I hear from most principals. It's boredom that is the leading edge of negative behavior, right? Got nothing to do, so I'm going to start bugging people, or I'm going to start bullying people because it's the only thing I've got. There's nothing else that's here to do. So when I've visited school after school across the country, and when a bigger project has been implemented, the first message from the principal is like the lineup after recess at the principal's office is gone or has been reduced exponentially, and that's a profound insight, right, about what we need to do here.
Glad you said it, because so many people will say, my God, the playgrounds are so boring now. They look like prison yards or something. They're being sort of, they're so sterile and lacking in life. But let me ask the question that someone will be thinking, this more time outdoors, is that not going to take away as a nation in our ability to learn the lessons of technology, of reading, of arts, and the rest of it, all the normal stuff that goes on inside classrooms? How is that affected by, spending far more time outside? Will one lose because the other gains? David. Sorry, David, you're muted. Can anyone come in on this? I think we have a mute there. Cam, did you hear that? Or
sorry about that. I couldn't find my unmute button.
Yeah, I know. Happens a lot.
So I'm gonna go back to something I said earlier, saying that every little bit of curriculum can be covered outdoors, and not only can it should. In Ontario, we have curriculum documents that support teaching and learning in the environment, of the environment, and about the environment. And in 2017, in the environmental scope and sequence documents, it talks that every subject area in every curriculum should take place in the outdoors for at least part of it. So not only should it, can it, but it should, even according to our government documents. The other thing I want to pull on two things that were talked about. First of all, about the sterility of school grounds. Just last week, OFIA, the Ontario Health and Physical Education Association, put out a report card on schoolyards in Ontario and Canada, and really quite a damaging report about the sterility that is in our school grounds. So again, that engagement of getting our students outside. The other thing that my colleagues have talked about is this idea of hierarchy in school. And the one thing that we see in schools more than ever, especially in Toronto, is the incredible diversity. And how do we break down those structures and hierarchy where the students become the learners, the teachers of each other, where they're sharing their rich cultural experiences that they're bringing into the schoolyards and sharing with each other, that teachers in the front of the classroom just can't do. Students learn best from each other. And how to gain rich cultural understandings of the diversity of this amazing students in our school and how in our schools and how much they have to offer.
I think at this point, I'd like to bring in some of the questions that have been waiting patiently there. So Mariah, if you have some of the questions to come in on, please.
I do, and there are some thanks in the comments for mentioning biodiversity and a bit about the power of the school garden and that any school can create it if it's small. Can the panelists address the phenomenon of school gardens?
Can the panelists address the phenomenon of school gardens?
David, I don't know if you were, I'll chime in because we're seeing this more and more because there's so many opportunities with school gardens. So we can be doing things that attract birds, butterflies. So we can start to look at how this actually can help with our teaching and delivery of curriculum. I think that also there's a way to do gardening that's accessible. So we can make it, if it's somebody in a chair, somebody with a mobility issue, they still can participate in that event or in that activity, sorry. And I also, what's cool is we could be growing things that then we could eat. And so kids can actually start from a seed, nurture that inside the classroom, and then plant it and take it all the way through to harvest. So I think that it could be one of those things that is an even playing field for everybody, and that can help us be empathetic with each other in an activity where we can get our hands dirty. I think there's the biodiversity comment. The one thing that we didn't really touch on is there is a health component to having a biodiverse environment and interaction with that soil. There is a brain-gut connection with the macro and microbiota that we actually intake by connecting with the soil. So I think we can tick off a lot of things with something so simple and actually enriching and fulfilling to see that through to the end.
Anyone else, or Cam?
I'll just do a shout out to, I see that Sunday Harrison is watching. Hey, hi Sunday. And, she has this great program, what's your program? Green Thumbs Growing Kids. Sorry about that. And that has done all sorts of great work on food security, gardens in schools. And I'll just add like another slant on it. There's all the wonderful things that go on with food growing and the outcome, the ingestion, the preparing of food. But there's also this aspect, it ties into this idea of stewardship, of caring for the space. Like a garden requires a lot of care. You got to water it, you got to weed it, you got to plant it, harvest, all the things, mulch it. And some of the terrific piece of research from the UK from about now, it's probably almost 30 years ago now. And the researcher really honed in on this idea of care, and that the cultural messages of our school grounds were so important for us to realize that they're sending messages of care, but that the care was a two-way street. It was this idea we need to create school grounds that say we care for you, and you specifically, whatever that age is, whether it's an elementary school or a high school. This is the catastrophe of putting an adult picnic-sized picnic table in a kindergarten yard. That says we weren't caring for you. We were caring for the adults that come here once in a while, but we didn't even think about you. So it's caring for, sending the right messages, but also So the flip side is caring for the space, like the children themselves, and how powerful an experience that is in and of itself, whether it's mulching the trees or whether it's tending the garden. This act of stewardship is a very powerful, rich experience. And so I just wanted to pull that out of the school garden conversation because I think it's really important. And I know that the groups out there that are focused on this are exceptional at this.
Ryan, another question, please.
Yeah, the next question I have here is there anything parents can do to promote more interest in outdoor learning?
Anything parents can do to promote more interest in outdoor learning, which is actually the question I was planning to ask later on anyways. How do you start mobilizing a real force of interest in this, getting parents involved? What can they do to get involved and help others get involved? Anybody want to lead on that? David, I'm going to throw it at you anyways. You deal with so many of these issues in so many places.
So I think there's two different questions that you're asking as well as the one that Mariah put forward. So I think I'll start with what Mariah said, like what can parents do? And I think what I'm going to start as is that parents are our children's first teacher. And especially young children, they look up to their parents, and what we as adults do inspire and mold and influence what our children will do. So if our children see us on our devices and on our screens and in front of inside, that's what they're going to do and what they aspire to do. If they see us exploring spaces, getting our hands dirty, doing new and different things outdoors, that's what they're going to want to do. So I think as parents, as adults, that's how we can support our children, really thinking that we are their first teacher. In terms of, from an educational standpoint, what parents can do is, again, ask the teachers what they're doing, what their plan is, how they can support going outdoors. And again, how are the teachers creating the conditions for learning that support outdoor learning to take place? You know, the teacher's comfort level may be just to begin with, instead of our indoor read aloud today, let's go outside and read it under a tree. But then how can that move forward to what are all the different shapes that you see with it around us? Or, you know, throw a hula hoop on the ground in the middle of your schoolyard and start to explore the biodiversity that exists right there in your yard. And even in some of our most sterile looking places, it's amazing to see the diversity when you take a step back from looking at that meadow and looking in that small 1 foot space and area of what's there.
John, you want to come in on this, John?
From my experience, oftentimes parents are the drivers of the change of the built environment. They're the ones that are raising the money. They're the ones that are communicating to the principal that this is something that they want to help with. But I don't think that I have the same experience that David just talked about. So that's why I didn't chime in.
Okay, another question, Mariah.
How can we make sure that we provide protected treed outdoor spaces? And also just in general, please comment on the importance of trees on school grounds.
Wants to come in on that?
Yeah, I will. I mean, trees are central, and you know, honestly, if we could do one thing, it would be trees, right? It would be planting so that we have the shade for the cooling, we have the shelter from the winds to create a hospitable place to be. That's so central. The moisture in the air. I mean, it can be the fruit from the trees if you go down that road, which is a step further than most. But you also have this sense of, you can create a sense of space and a sense of place with trees too, by creating enclosed areas or wide open areas. The sound, I mean, the key is the care needs to be made central in the care of the trees, like a mulching program and a caging program. It's important for people to realize that school grounds are amongst the most challenging landscapes in our public space, because they are used 10 months of the year, no matter the weather, 5 days a week. And then often, because and thankfully in Canada, they're public spaces, they also get used after school and on weekends. So they're intensely used. So tree protection is central, and survival of trees. We start with a standard in caging, so that those young trees have the chance to grow. Because what happens is kids love the trees to death. So we need the trees, we need their protection, we need them properly protected, mulched, and then placed appropriately too. And we don't want to get technical in this session, but suffice to say, critically important, and important that the school board builds the supports so that the implementation of them is done properly, and maintenance.
I think just to add to Cam's comments too, part of that success would be how many trees are we planting for the population of the school? Because Cam is right, kids will love them to death. The much loved tree syndrome. So if we only put one tree in, promise you it's not going to survive. And then the other question is, how big can we go? Because the bigger, the more we can clump together, the more that we can put in, the better chance we have of that success, because we can take the pressure off of the few that are there and spread that pressure out.
I'd actually like to. Sorry,
if
go ahead.
Could I just speak really quickly on both what John and Cam said? Happening tonight is a TDSB regular board meeting, and the last item on the agenda is our climate action report, our climate action plan. It's very ambitious, and speaking to reduction of greenhouse gases and net zero moving forward. But key in that plan is doubling the urban forest and looking at the planting of large trees. And Cam and his work at Evergreen was so critical in creating those design guidelines to make sure that trees have a fighting chance to survive in our school grounds. But then the intentional planting of those trees moving forward, in terms of to what John was saying, the one tree is for sure going to die. So how do we make sure that we're planting enough trees to ensure survival, creating those shade spaces, and actually supporting the cooling of buildings in the summer, the cooling of spaces outside for the students during their free time, recess time, and learning time. And then also supporting our environment. Toronto, we live in a highly dense area. Every tree we can plant to support our clean air is so vitally important.
I want to just jump back to a question before this, because we've been talking about there's a significant movement underway, and it's always interesting to see how people get inspired in a concept of change that they can see actually happening, affecting their lives. And I was going to put in that, parents might also, there are many ways they can start by educating themselves about what's out there and what's going on, starting with listening to forums like this, of course, but also once you get into online media or going to the issue, what's been written in the papers and that, you'll find out that there's much more coverage than you anticipate. And they give you names of new groups to get in touch with. It's a very interesting and rather easy area of activity to inform yourself on and get connected with if you wish to go further in terms of helping out. That's my own view from seeing how the media is working on this and how many sites are out there that are really useful and quite fascinating. Mariah, another question?
The next question is there anything specifically being done to help students who, for potentially financial reasons, may not have the right clothing for outdoor learning year-round?
I think the answer to that is yes. And I mean, my son, both my sons went through the one of Canada's first public outdoor kindergartens at a public school here in Toronto, and clothing was, and this issue came up. Not everybody had the full winter suit, and this was like, they took seriously the outdoors and all weather, so they were out there every day, and often for the full day, if not at least half the day. And so they started a clothing library, and the sort of clothes lending. And this is also, just back to your question earlier, Brian, like how can parents help? It feels pretty good to be supporting, if you can, some of the other families to have the clothing that they need so that their kids can have this enriched learning opportunity. So the school came together. Some people had ties to buying clubs or to stores where they could get a wholesale or whatever it was, and we were able to kind of build a clothing library. So that's not too far fetched, and it goes on from there. You can find donations. I know even at our site at Evergreen Brickworks, we had Mountain Equipment Co-op donated boots and clothes that we could for our lending program there at that site. So there's ways to look for donations within the community, outside of the community. And I think that's a really important thing. You don't want any of that to be an obstacle. You want the clothes and all of it to be there, and that it's normal for everyone, so that everyone feels equally kind of ready. It's so important.
What about adding in more? We've talked a lot about playgrounds, quite rightly, because that's going to be the prime front lines kind of, but field trips, the vital importance of giving schools of every income level and every location the chance of really interesting, creative field trips. And we live in a area of the world where they're just phenomenal opportunities for field trips. David, is there a way that we can move better on this score as well? Or does that really get into complicated logistics and major hurdles?
Experiential learning is so important. And so in our department, it's our mandate to provide 2 day trips for every student in grade kindergarten to grade 8, and 1 overnight trip between the grades of grade 5 to 8. And then support ongoing trips for secondary students as required, as available, and as needed. So we support specialized programs at the secondary level, specialist high skills major components, supporting Indigenous education, because of course learning on the land is so important. But as you said, Brian, in your opening comments, there are so many fantastic providers right in and around Toronto. TDSB has partnered with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, Evergreen Brickworks, and so many others that create rich opportunities. In the Toronto District School Board, we actually have an excursions directory, which provides teachers a list of vendor partners that they can go and explore. So by grade, by content, by location, trying to do some of that work to support making it easier for teachers to get outside, and for principals to be able to say, look, that is an approved vendor. Yeah, by all means, go for it, and provide that rich opportunity for students.
We haven't mentioned too much. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, but it's a monetary issue as well, though. Field trips cost a lot of money, school buses, and the experience itself. And so it does take some creativity and prioritizing on school administrators and school officials to support those trips. Some schools can rely on their parent communities, fundraising, school councils. Others can't. And so how do schools prioritize those outdoor experiential learning? But there are so many free opportunities. One of the things we posted last year was all the public parks within 100 meters of schools in Toronto. And just again, getting right outside your front door, and it allows students to be the leaders. oftentimes teachers are parachuted into the neighborhoods where they teach, but those families, those students, they know their community. Allow them to shine and share about their natural community and what they know and what happened there, and listen to the elders, because there's so much learning that can happen right within your community that costs nothing.
And as a society, we have an awful lot of learning outdoors to get on with. It seems we've been lacking for some time, and there's a lot of opportunities. Mariah, one more question before I start sort of wrapping up questions. You have one?
Yep, there's a request in the comments for all the panelists to please share or talk a little bit about some of the research studies that prove the benefits of outdoor learning.
Good question. Who wants to go first? David? You were mentioning research earlier, just a moment ago. Research that is out there that proves the benefits, really, of outdoor learning. Are there any that really pop into mind that we should all be reading about or listening to?
It's a good question. I was just thinking about the systematic literature review on outdoor risky play. There's a ton of information there, especially when it comes back to the conversation about risk, perceived risk versus actual risk, and then the learning that comes with that. That was the one of the things that popped in my head when that question came up.
Yeah, I'd echo that, John. I think that, so that's, you can find that on Outdoor Play Canada's website, and that was a systemic.
Say it slowly, just for everybody to get. What's the name again?
Yeah, you can find it on Outdoor Play Canada's website, and so there was a systemic review of all the literature, and it was led by Dr. Mark Tremblay, and a terrific piece. And so there's a lot of good information there. I think, the Special Places, Special People is a wonderful piece of research from the UK that was published by Learning Through Landscapes a while ago, but it was a terrific piece with some terrific insights, like I was mentioning about the cultural messages of these spaces. I think the emergent area of this is in mental health. There's such rising concern for mental health in children, and you can also find some of that on the Outdoor Play Canada's website. So, there's research into health, there's research into learning, and then there's some of the research that's interesting. I find interesting is the team that they're from New York State, and I can't think of the researcher right now. It might come to me, but the work she's doing is on attention and the attention disorders. And so we've seen a great rise in the range, the spectrum of attention disorders. And this research speaks to how there's this aspect of restorative focus, restorative attention from being outside. And this isn't just children, but how this has sort of a calming effect, and it enables us, and you think about it in a school context, it has a restorative aspect, so that when we get back in the classroom, it helps us to focus. There's some lovely subtleties to this work, because it talks about how when you're out in nature, you have a scattered focus, and that your focus isn't necessarily, it jumps in and out of things, but there's a broad, open awareness, and how this sort of recharges us for when we need to go into addition or subtraction or fractions or whatever it might be. So that there's some really interesting work there. I'll let other people add in.
I added in the chat, last year, the TDSB created Taking Learning Outside portal, and it really is designed to support teachers and families and administrators to support outdoor learning in and around school. And the link I put is why outdoor learning, and there is a whole series of articles that people can access, from public health to Outdoor Play Canada to OFIA to Indigenous resources about the importance of learning from the land and being outside, and the role of truth and reconciliation. So a wide variety. to really start that rabbit hole. There's a lot of documentation out there to support, from infographics, from Child and Nature Alliance as well, available in both French and English, Outdoor Play Canada. There's lots available.
Well, good to stress. I'm glad you're stressing this, because it is terribly important that people do educate themselves more. I'm talking as one who's learned a lot just in the last week going into these portals and looking at these studies. They're just absolutely fascinating. I wanted to ask you, as we don't have too much time left, but you get a kind of international perspective. Yes, we can see now there's a clear movement underway in this region, but is there something internationally going on? Do you detect the same drive to get education fundamentally redesigned to bring in or to bring out more of the outdoors? What are you seeing, David, abroad, for instance, at the moment?
It's happening all over the world. I think Scandinavia has really kind of been driving the way in terms of the forest school movement and what's happening there. But Australia is a country that we could do a lot of comparisons to, that are really focusing on outdoor play and redefining their school grounds. Lots of stories about outdoor schools in Polynesia and different parts of the world. So there's lots of examples from around the world. I'm sure John and Cam would be able to speak to some pretty neat experiences and experiments that are happening around the world.
John?
Definitely, I would add New Zealand in there, Denmark as well. I think there's a lot that we were learning from them. They also have a very different. If you look at the EU standard, for example, for playgrounds, it's a lot less strict than what we're seeing here in Canada and in the US. And because they're looking at the stats and where do you really see injuries, and I think they're a lot more open to the self-discovery. So there's the forest schools in New Zealand, they'll have fire pits, and their kids will cook will catch the fish in the river and cook it over the fire. And these are really young kids at a young age that you think there's no way they should be near fire, but it's really safe because they're learning and they're being taught, as you go. So it's not like they've never seen this before. They've learned from their parents and they're applying it. So I think there's some things that we're learning for sure. Even Indonesia, that we've been seeing them picking up this mantle and making this something that's important too. And then of course in the US, the movement has really gained traction down there as well. So, Cam, I know you had. I think you had some images maybe that you could share. I don't know if I'm.
I'd love to. I'll just a couple of quick ones if you don't mind, Brian, because I think I've had the good fortune of doing a fair amount of international travel in this work.
Right.
And what you see is shocking from a cultural perspective. So here we are in England. Can you see that? The labyrinth? And what I love about this example, so this is at the Coombs School, just about an hour and a half west of London. And this is one of the extraordinary school grounds in the world. It's amazing. It started as a farmer's field, so no gift from heaven. It was like hard work from the head teacher and the students. But this idea that it's not just about permanent features. What they do here is they have 2 spaces for labyrinths, but they're spaces and they renew them each year as part of a cultural exploration, because labyrinths are different in each culture. So we read about the culture, we learn about this culture, then we build the labyrinth, and then we walk the labyrinth, and we might sing the songs or so on and so forth. But a very different idea about this kind of school ground as a landscape, as canvas for learning and exploration. I love that idea. Here's an idea of this is extraordinarily beautiful. This is at a kindergarten in Oslo, and with water. So these are flow forms. I don't know how well you could see this, but with water channeling in that the child at any height can put their hand in. and you see the lushness of the green environment. You see how much, I mean, this is any one of us are drawn to this because of its beauty, the natural connection, the sound. We can imagine the sound of water. So it's just, a different aesthetic to a children's environment. Here we've got an image. This might not be terrific. This is from Berlin. But here you see an elementary school ground that has topography, that has this idea of rooms, different heights, that has water and sand, that has willow growing up wildly. That when I asked the designer, I said, what's that part of the school ground over there? There was a forest. And the answer was, oh, that's where the kids can get away from the adults. And I had, one of those shocking cultural moments where it's like, we don't do that in Canada, because we don't trust children to be in there on their own. And apparently you do, so, then you go to Japan and then you find yourself in a conversation with the principal here about the importance of bare feet in contact with the ground and how essential it is to brain development. And so you look around, and if you look around this photo in the background, you see all the kids are in bare feet. And they're not just walking. This child is carrying a baton here because they're practicing their sprints. And this is on sort of crushed stone, sort of sandy stone. So, my little Canadian brain is exploding at this point. And then, and but then they have a cultural aspect. Say we're still in Japan here, climbing the bamboo pole. And this child at the top here is about 3.5 or 4 years old, scrambled up this thing like they were Hercules, and this post is 12 feet high. So I'll stop there just to give you a taste of what I think is so interesting here is when we travel and look further afield, we see whole different assumptions about risk, about learning, about beauty, about the way we include children in things. I didn't show you the goats and the sheep on the Japanese school grounds that they're looking after, and same within the UK. Just expands this idea, and I think we need to keep pushing open this possibility, right? It's not just about a log structure instead of a steel one. There's much bigger. We've got places to go here to really enrich education and the community.
That's a tremendously inspiring moment to wrap up in a way what the intriguing and inventive what areas where we're working on here, what we're achieving, but also what's been done around the world. This is a kind of worldwide movement, which I think the world really needs right now. And I think it appreciates it needs it, which is a really fundamental fact. I'd like to, because we are out of time, ask each of you if you could briefly sum up. I hope it's not an unfair question, but if this goes well here, where will we be perhaps 10 years from now? When we come out of the pandemic, when we come out of COVID, when we've taken our bruises, when we've learned from lessons learned and all we had to confront, where might we be now that we'd be looking back and saying, boy, what a change we've seen? John, why don't I start with you this time?
Wow, that's a powerful question. I think 10 years from now, if we're doing everything right, we'll have created the next generation of our environmental stewards. So we will have those that are going to pick up the mantle, that will care about our environment, that will care to keep pushing this movement forward. I think is one of the outcomes that we'll see. I think we'll see less people having more of a balance between their screen times and their interactions with actual real humans. I'm hoping that we get that, and then we have a more resilient group of people that come out of this than I am even. I think that I was lucky from where I didn't need to have a playground at my school because of what I had access to. But I think with the changes in the world today, having nature where our kids are, because they don't get to travel as far away from their homes as I did as a kid, will hopefully help with all of this change.
Interesting. Cam, where will we be maybe 10 years from now if we play it right, if we do it right?
Well, I think in a visual sense, hopefully we have a lot of green school grounds that start to feel more not only rich learning environments, but we'll see it as a community hub, more like a local park. That's this asset that will be cherished more. So it has a spillover effect that's intergenerational, not merely for our children, but for our communities as a place to come together. I think John touched on some key things here. I mean, the hope here is to develop more resilient kids, more curious kids that aren't unafraid of risk, who are healthy and good, and capable in their bodies. So there's a real balance here between the outcomes being both on the physical side and the kind of mental, emotional, social side. I think these are the outcomes we're looking for, is these holistic development of the child. I think we'll see school boards supporting this, and I think we'll see our ministries, and that's a key thing where we finally see not just the building, but we see a campus for learning at our public schools. That is a fundamental shift we need from our provinces and leadership and the highest levels in our country in education, so that the attention we pay in the design and build and use of these spaces that's where one of the things I hope we get to in the next 10 years as well.
And David, you deal so much with the real bureaucracy of out there and the hurdles as well as the possibilities. When you look ahead through all the hoops and that'll have to be gone through by the enthusiasts, what do you see the possibilities realistically are a decade from now?
Realistically, I'm going to go back to something I said earlier and say that we normalize that teaching and learning happens all around us. And this idea of moving beyond the four walls of a classroom and what we see. And therefore, the intentional design, like Cam was saying, about school grounds, but going beyond the schools and exploring communities and all of the amazing resources that we have to us. And so, yes, John, we need to create the stewards for the next generation. The generation coming needs to do better than we've done, understanding that we're borrowing the world that we're in from our children, that they're the ones that live in it, and our children's children. Agree, Cam. How do we have healthy, curious kids that will be the creative innovators of tomorrow? And therefore, how do we really harness the global competencies of creativity, collaboration, beyond a screen, and interact in ways that connect us to each other and the world around us to make the world and each other better for it?
Well, I find this has been a fascinating discussion, and of course, a lot of it keeps coming back to the reality that if movements need to go forward, have to go forward, must go forward for all our sakes, people need to get involved. They have to take an interest, and they have to join in learning much more about the subject at hand. And I hope tonight has been a start for some about learning more about this absolutely incredible area, which I think that this country is really looking for now, for a lot of new answers from us. It looks towards the future and what can be done. So I'd like to thank all three guests, John, Cam, and David. And I'd like to thank you for watching. It's been interesting. Thank you for joining us. On November 3rd, I hope you're back to join us. The subject will be food literacy. Good night. I'm Brian Stewart.